Hi class, today I want to briefly overview the discussion and just post a comment here and announcements for everybody. So this week's, several weeks discussion was on the literature associated with sugar addiction, and then we had an additional article on arguing that sugar is more addictive than cocaine by Serge Ahmed. So some of the evidence on sugar addiction, I think, is really quite fascinating. The article from Heubel, which is really a review, I think is, some of my favorite work, or summarizes some of my favorite work on the subject. It shows, you can see sort of addiction-like phenotypes by providing certain access to conditions like binge access to sugar. You can even see anatomical correlates. There's a group at Boston College University from the Koop family that has demonstrated that, animals experience withdrawal symptoms when forcibly withdrawn from sugar. There seems to be a lot of parallels between, sugar intake and drug addiction, or sugar dependence and drug dependence. But what about this idea that sugar is more addictive than drugs of abuse like cocaine? I don't know too many people that are out in the city park, trying to get handouts for a candy bar, or selling their body for Snickers bars. And then there are some issues, some confounds here with the animal literature that, deserve attention. One is food restriction. So, especially a food-restricted animal is going to work harder for sugar than they would a drug of abuse. And to me, my first reaction to that is, frankly, no shit. I mean, of course, a food-restricted animal is going to work hard for sugar. They're going to die if they don't get it. I mean, that's sort of like a biological drive. And the idea is, or one idea is, that drugs of abuse sort of usurp this dopaminergic system that is driving the animal to seek out the sweet treat, especially when their body really needs it, and sort of gives this sort of false sense of value that isn't real, but it sort of tricks your brain into thinking that it's real and you need more of it. And that, I think, might be sort of like an amplification of what is going on. Mitch Reutman at the University of Chicago, Illinois, has demonstrated that if you food restrict an animal, you get a greater dopamine response to the sugar than in the food-sated animal. So, one thing that we need to pay attention to here is whether or not the animals are food restricted, which they typically are, and how does that influence this entire rationale and reasoning that sugar might be even more addictive than cocaine? Just in general, I mean, the animals need to take in a certain caloric load every day. I mean, that's a biological need, much like breathing. And you start messing with that, you're going to see them work really hard to get their nutritional value to survive. It's not that really surprising to me, and really what's sort of funny to know is, the truth is that we've known that animals will work harder for food and sugar pellets than cocaine for 40 years. I mean, this literature, these observations exist in the literature really going back to the 70s, and nobody really, really the 80s. Really nothing before the 80s, with the effort schedules. Really the first came out, my PhD advisor invented the first, real schedules to assess motivated behavior for drugs, specifically cocaine, and I believe it was 77 or 78. So, and then, in the 80s, people started doing a lot of studies comparing various things, and people saw that animals worked harder for food, especially in a food-restricted state early on. They just didn't think to make a big deal out of it. And, maybe maybe we sort of were ignoring something that was really important, or maybe we just were like, well, of course they're working hard for sugar pellets in a food-restricted state. Like really, let's just use this as a control of natural reward and see how various pretreatments affect, motivation for drug versus motivation for natural reward. But is sugar a natural reward? To some level, yeah, maybe, but I mean, like, in its pure isolated form, this refined sugar that's added to everything in our society because we buy more of it, if there's sugar in it, I mean, that's the product you're going to buy, right? The sweeter one. So, does that make these foods more addictive? Can you be dependent on Twinkies and these sorts of things? It's certainly worth thinking about. But, there are some caveats with the animal literature, in particular food restriction, and then B, just the fact that animals need sugar to survive. There's a biological drive to take in carbohydrates. The brain needs glycogen. The brain only uses glycogen as an energy store. It can use ketones when you are in ketosis, but that's certainly not plan A for the brain. So there's this huge drive, to make you want to take carbohydrates. So, you have to take all of these things into consideration when weighing these reports. But there is certainly some compelling evidence, especially from Heubel, that there are certain features of addiction that can be seen, with repeated, especially binge-like patterns of sugar intake. Definitely something to think about.